Most people assume the Korean War failed soldiers because it was underprepared, rushed, or politically constrained. That is all true, but it actually obscures a deeper problem that had been building since World War II. Modern armies had begun to forget just how fragile their own systems were. Korea exposed this weakness brutally. In extreme cold, sophisticated equipment failed while improvised solutions endured. One of the clearest examples was heat, specifically how soldiers cooked melted snow and kept themselves functional when official gear just stopped working. The irony is that one of the most reliable answers came not from Korea at all, but from a much older, largely forgotten World War II design. A crude stove made from a tin lid. If you value these kinds of overlooked lessons in military history, you might want to subscribe to Echoes of Valor. This channel exists to examine what official histories usually pass over. The tin lid stove is not remembered because it was innovative. It is remembered when it is remembered at all because it refused to fail. And that quality, more than efficiency or elegance, explains why it continues to outperform modern designs under real-world conditions. The stove mattered because heat was not a comfort but a logistical requirement. In World War II, heat was not treated as a luxury. It was a basic function tied directly to combat readiness. Soldiers needed hot food to maintain caloric intake, hot water to prevent dehydration, and a reliable way to melt snow or purify questionable sources. Failure to do so weakened units without a shot being fired. Yet armies quickly learned that issuing complex stoves at scale created new vulnerabilities. Pressurized burners, moving parts, and specialized fuels all depended on uninterrupted supply chains and favorable conditions. On paper, these systems worked. In mud, cold, and exhaustion, they often did not. The tin lid stove emerged not from official design bureaus, but from necessity. Soldiers adapted scrap metal, often ration can lids, flattened tins, or mess gear, into simple burners that required no pressure, no valves, and no precision manufacturing. What they lost in efficiency, they gained in certainty. World War II soldiers learned that simplicity survives where optimization fails. The environments of World War II varied wildly, but certain problems repeated themselves. Fuel froze. Equipment cracked. Replacement parts did not arrive on time. In these conditions, the most valuable tools were those that could tolerate abuse and neglect. The tin lid stove worked because it accepted poor fuel, uneven airflow, and rough handling without protest. It burned gasoline, diesel, kerosene, or whatever could be scavenged. It could be relit after being dropped in snow or mud. If damaged, it was reshaped by hand or replaced entirely within minutes. This design philosophy was not accidental. Soldiers learned through trial and error that over-engineered solutions increased dependence on logistics. A stove that required a specific fuel blend or a functioning pump was only as reliable as the supply system behind it. The overlooked lesson is that these stoves were not primitive, they were adapted. It is tempting to describe the tin lid stove as crude, but that misses the point. It was optimized for failure tolerance. Every aspect of its design assumed things would go wrong. Fuel would be dirty, conditions would be cold, users would be tired. This mindset stood in contrast to many officially issued stoves, which assumed correct use, proper maintenance, and intact components. Those assumptions rarely held at the front. In this sense, the tin lid stove was a quiet rebuke to industrial thinking. It demonstrated that reliability is not about complexity, but about understanding how systems degrade under stress. The Korean War confirmed what World War II soldiers already knew. When the Korean War began, much of this hard-earned knowledge had, faded from institutional memory. New equipment promised efficiency and standardization, while old improvisations were seen as relics of a less advanced era. But, Korea proved otherwise. Extreme cold crippled pressurized stoves and fuel canisters. Once again, soldiers returned to improvised burners made from scrap metal, echoing solutions developed a decade earlier. What makes this continuity remarkable is not that soldiers improvised, but that they had to rediscover the same solutions. The tin lid stove survived because reality kept demanding it, not because doctrine preserved it. These stoves influenced survival training without ever being officially celebrated. After Korea, military survival doctrine shifted subtly. Training began to emphasize redundancy, improvisation, and environmental adaptability. Soldiers were taught not only how to use issued equipment, but how to function without it. The tin lid stove never appeared as a standard item, but its logic permeated training culture. Simplicity became a virtue again. Designs were evaluated not just on performance, but on how they failed. Civilian survival communities later absorbed these ideas, often without knowing their origin. Many modern minimalist stove designs, echo the same principles: gravity-fed fuel, open combustion, and ease of repair. The lineage traces back to soldiers solving immediate problems with scrap. The psychological value of a reliable heat source is often underestimated. Heat stabilizes routines. A functioning stove meant hot coffee, warmed rations, and a brief pause from exposure. These moments mattered. They preserved morale and reduced cognitive fatigue. From an operational standpoint, this translated into better decision-making and endurance. Soldiers who could reliably heat food were less likely to make errors caused by exhaustion or hypothermia. The tin lid stove provided consistency. It did not promise speed or cleanliness, but it delivered predictability. In chaotic environments, predictability is honestly a force multiplier. Modern camp stoves still struggle with the same problems these designs solved. Despite decades of technological advancement, many modern stoves remain, vulnerable to cold, altitude, and fuel inconsistency. They perform exceptionally in controlled conditions and poorly when variables stack against them. The tin lid stove does not outperform modern stoves in convenience or efficiency. It outperforms them in inevitability. If fuel exists and flame is possible, it works. For survivalists, this distinction matters. Preparedness is not about maximizing performance under ideal conditions. It is about, maintaining function when assumptions collapse. Remembering these tools helps correct how military history is told. Wars are often remembered through battles and leaders, but survival happens in the margins, in small adaptations that keep people alive long enough to fight. The tin lid stove represents a category of wartime knowledge that rarely survives peacetime transitions. It is informal, unsanctioned, and difficult to quantify, yet its impact was real. Ignoring these details creates an incomplete picture of how wars are endured. Understanding them restores balance to the historical record. Why this history still matters. The value of the tin lid stove is not nostalgia, it is instruction. It teaches that resilience comes from humility, accepting that systems fail and planning accordingly. World War II soldiers understood this instinctively. The Korean War reminded institutions of it, sometimes painfully. The lesson remains relevant wherever people rely on tools under stress. Remembering these overlooked stories matters because they reveal how survival actually works, not in theory, but in practice. If you value careful, in-depth historical analysis that goes beyond surface narratives, subscribe to Echoes of Valor and share this video with others who care about understanding the past with honesty and nuance.